Long before maps were drawn, long before strangers arrived with new names for old saints, there was a village cradled by forests and silence. Amalkwe, a place where the earth cracked in dry seasons, but never beside the sacred river. A place where elders spoke softly because the believed spirits listened closely. A place where obedience was wealth and memory was protection. They say the river did not begin as water. They say it began as mercy. When the land was thirsty and hope was fading, a boy named Ikena walked into the forest, rejected, wounded. And there, where dust should have remained dust, water rose. Not from the sky, not from the ground, but from covenant. From that day forward, Amalkwe did not just drink water. They drank promise. Generations were born into its sound, the gentle, steady flow that became the village's heartbeat. Children learned its boundaries before they learned their own names. Hunters lowered their voices near it. Mothers warned with it. Elders swore by it. The river became law. The river became identity. The river became proof that heaven had once touched earth. And for a long time, that was enough. But stories, no matter how sacred, must survive time. And time is a quiet eraser. This is the story of a people who kept an oath. Of a river that remembered when men began to forget. Of faith, both ancient and new, standing face to face. This is the story of Amalkwe, of Ikena, of covenant, and change. And every legend begins the same way, with something small that refuses to disappear. Please subscribe to this channel for more African stories like this. Now let us begin. Years rolled into decades in Amalkwe. The boy the river chose became a man. The man became an elder. And the elder became a legend. Ikena, son of the hunter, served the sacred river faithfully. His voice grew deeper with age, but his presence remained calm like still water at dawn. Every morning before sunrise, he walked barefoot to the river bank. He would tap his sacred staff gently against the earth and whisper, "Great Spirit of water, your people remember." And the river would answer, not with words, but with a soft ripple across its surface. Children would watch him from a distance. To them, he was more than a priest. He was the living proof that heaven listens. The laws of the river were respected without question. Women fetched water carefully from the permitted side. No one dared wash clothes in the sacred section. The fish that swam in the holy part were never touched. Even hunters who feared nothing would lower their eyes when passing that side of the river. The story of how the river appeared was told again and again during moonlight gatherings. Grandmothers would gather children around the fire and say, "Your great-grandfather saw the spirit rise from the water. Your ancestor was chosen because he showed kindness." The younger ones would gasp in wonder. And the river continued to flow. Clear, strong, unending. When dry season came to neighboring villages and their streams shrunk into muddy puddles, Amalquin still had water. Farmers from nearby communities would visit and say, "Your river is blessed." And the elders would reply proudly, "It is not luck. It is obedience." Years passed. Ikena grew frail. His once powerful steps became slower. His white hair now resembled that of the spirit who first appeared. One evening, as the sun melted into orange light across the river, he called his eldest son to his side. They sat quietly at the riverbank. "Remember," Ikena said softly, "the river is not ours. It is a gift, and gifts must be respected." His son nodded, tears forming in his eyes. That night, the river flowed peacefully. By morning, Ikena had joined his ancestors. The entire village mourned. Drums were not beaten loudly. They were beaten slowly, respectfully. The river seemed to move more gently that week. Some said it was grieving too. After the burial rites, the elders gathered. The sacred staff was passed to Ikena's son. The chief priest declared before the village, "The covenant continues." And it did. For another generation, the laws remained untouched. No one dared challenge the sacred boundaries. When a young boy once threw a stone into the holy section as a joke, his mother dragged him to the elders to apologize before sunset. Fear and respect worked hand in hand. Amalquai prospered. Their festivals became famous beyond neighboring towns. Their masquerades danced by the river during celebrations. Travelers would wash their faces in its water and say, "This river carries peace." But time does not stand still. Children grow into adults. Adults grow into leaders. And with every generation, memories soften. Stories begin to sound like myths. And the first quiet question began to form in young minds. Did the spirit truly appear, or was it just a story? The river still flowed, but doubt had been born. And doubt is the beginning of forgetting. The first sign of change in Amalquai was not loud. It did not arrive with thunder. It came with a bell. A small handbell ringing gently one Sunday morning. Ting, ting, ting. At first, people thought it was just travelers passing through. But then strangers began to visit more often. They came dressed differently: long shirts, polished sandals, books tucked under their arms. They spoke of a new way, a new covenant, a new understanding of God. Some villagers gathered under the Udala tree to listen. The strangers spoke about love, about forgiveness, about salvation, about a kingdom not built by hands. Many were curious. Amalquai had always been spiritual. They believed in unseen forces. They respected powers beyond the human eye. So hearing about another path did not feel strange. At first, the elders watched carefully. The traditional leaders did not resist openly. They believed, truth does not fear comparison. Soon, A small group of families began attending regular prayers with the visitors. Songs were sung, different from the rhythmic chants of the shrine. Clapping replaced drums. Voices rose without masquerades. It was new. It was exciting. And slowly, the new faith grew. Months later, land was requested to build a church. The elders discussed deeply. Some warned, it must not be too close to the sacred forest. But others argued, we are welcoming people. We cannot push them far away. Finally, land was given. It was near the forest, not directly beside the sacred river, but close enough that the church bell could be heard faintly from the riverbank. Construction began. Mud bricks were molded. Palm fronds were tied. Within a short time, a simple church stood proudly among the trees. The first Sunday service filled the air with unfamiliar songs. Children loved it. Young people felt modern. Some said, "This is progress." At first, nothing changed about the river. Churchgoers still fetched water respectfully. They still avoided the sacred section. They still repeated the old story. But slowly, something invisible began to shift. The younger generation began asking questions. Questions their grandparents never dared to ask. If the river is holy, why does it look like every other river? Why must fish not be touched? Are we not educated now? Is it not just tradition? One evening after church service, a small group of youths sat outside laughing. One of them pointed toward the forest and said, "If a spirit truly lives there, let it show itself again." They laughed boldly. The older men nearby held them, and silence fell. For generations, the story of Ikena had been sacred, untouchable. Now it was being questioned openly. The chief priest, now an old man himself, stood at the riverbank one sunset and whispered, "Great Spirit, the hearts of the children are changing." The river flowed as usual, but it did not ripple as strongly as before. The church continued to grow. More women began attending. More families joined. Some said, "We can serve God and still respect tradition." Others said, "Old fears must die." No one noticed that the sacred boundaries were no longer discussed as often during family meetings. Children no longer trembled when they walked near the holy section. The story of the Spirit began to sound like something that happened long ago. And long ago can slowly become never. The bell rang louder each Sunday. Ting, 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 and somewhere deep in the forest, the river flowed quietly. Waiting, watching, as Amakwe stood between two covenants. One remembered, one newly embraced, not knowing that the smallest act of doubt would soon test everything. It began with a joke. That was how small it seemed. One dry afternoon, after church service, a group of young men gathered beneath the mango tree near the edge of the forest. They were educated, confident, and unafraid of old stories. They had grown up hearing about Ikena, but to them, it sounded like folklore, something for moonlight tales, not modern minds. One of them, Obina, picked up a small fishing net and spun it lazily in his hand. He laughed. If this river is sacred, let it stop me. The others chuckled nervously. Another boy added, our grandfathers were afraid because they didn't know better. We know better now. They walked toward the sacred part of the river. The part untouched for generations. The part where fish swam freely, never haunted. The air near that section always felt cooler, heavier, as if watched. For a brief moment, one of the boys hesitated. Maybe we shouldn't, but pride is louder than caution. Obina stepped into the shallow edge and threw the net. The splash echoed. The forest went quiet. Even the church bell, far away, seemed distant. They waited. Nothing happened. No thunder, no wind, no unseen voice. The net tightened. They pulled it out. Inside it, three large fish. Silver scales flashing under sunlight. Alive, beautiful. For a second, the boys froze. But when nothing supernatural struck them down, they burst into laughter. See, just stories. We have been ferrying water. They carried the fish back to the village proudly. Some elders saw them. Their faces darkened. One old woman dropped the firewood she was carrying. Return it, she whispered weakly. But the boys ignored her. That evening, the fish were cooked. Nothing happened. No sickness, no lightning, no mysterious dreams. The next day, word spread. And when consequences do not come immediately, disrespect grows faster. Soon, others followed. Women began washing clothes in the sacred section. They said, it is cleaner here. Young girls began swimming freely in areas once forbidden. Laughter replaced reverence. Children splashed where silence once lived. Even some church members began to speak boldly. Water belongs to God, not spirits. The chief priest, now frail and gray, stood at the riverbank one evening and felt something he had never felt before. The water seemed lighter. Not spiritually light, but shallow. He stepped into it. The level barely reached his knees. That had never happened during dry season. He knelt and whispered, Great Spirit of Amalkwe, forgive us. The river did not ripple. Days turned into weeks. The sacred fish population reduced. The water level dropped slowly. So slowly that most people did not notice. Until one morning, a woman who had gone early to fetch water returned with fear in her eyes. The sacred side is muddy. Men rushed to check. It was true. The once clear holy section had turned slightly brown. Still flowing, but weaker. Some blamed climate. Some blamed the sun. No one blamed disobedience. Because admitting guilt is harder than blaming nature. That night, an elder stood in the village square and said, We are tasting something older than us. But many shrugged. After all, the boys who first caught the fish were still alive, healthy, laughing, and that is how the river was broken. Not with violence, not with war, but with repeated small acts of unbelief. The flow reduced again, barely noticeable, but steady, and deep inside the forest, something ancient was withdrawing. Quietly, weeks passed after the first fish were taken from the sacred river. At first, it was easy to ignore. The water still flowed, though weaker. The fish still swam, though fewer in number. But slowly, the forest grew quieter. Birds no longer chirped above the riverbank. Insects that once danced along the river's edge disappeared. Even the wind seemed hesitant to enter the clearing. Then one dry morning, the villagers noticed it. The river was gone, not shrunk, not slowed, gone. Where Ikena's ancestors had worked, where children had played for generations, there was only cracked mud and stones. Panic spread quietly at first, then loudly. Women screamed. Mothers ran to check the old, familiar spots. Children cried. Farmers' crops began to wilt without the river's nearby life. The elders gathered immediately. The chief priest, now one of the oldest men alive in Amalkwe, knelt at the empty riverbank. His hands shook. Spirit of Amalkwe, why have you left us? He poured libation, called upon the ancestors, and chanted every prayer he knew. But the forest remained silent. No ripple, no whisper, no blessing. For the first time in Amalkwe's memory, the village had no water. The people turned to the church that now stood near the riverbank. They prayed there, sang there, but even the pastors admitted something strange. This is a river you cannot bring back with human hands. Some villagers began blaming each other. Some cursed the youth who had first disrespected the river. Some blamed the new faith, claiming the church had angered the spirits. The younger generation wept in confusion. The elders mourned silently. No one knew what to do. Men began digging shallow holes in the ground. Women collected rainwater. Some went to neighboring villages to buy water. Amalkwe, once proud of its sacred river, was now a village surviving on hand-dug holes and government water trucks. And deep in the forest, where the river had once flowed, a faint trace remained. A line of smooth stone cutting through the earth, a bend in the trees, a moss-covered path where water had run. The elders called it the sign of the river. They would take visitors there and whisper, "See this? The river was here. It can still be here, if respect returns." But respect had been forgotten. Some young villagers swam recklessly in other parts of the remaining stream. Some hunted fish from the riverbed. Some mocked the old stories. The forest watched. The wind whispered. But the river would not return. Amalkwe survived. But the lesson of Ikena, of the spirit of water, and of obedience, slowly became a memory. And when the next dry season arrived, the villagers prayed desperately. If you ever loved us, Spirit, send water again. But only the forest answered. And in modern times, Amalkwe remains dry. No sacred river, no flowing spring, no water except what humans bring or dig. The elders still point to the forest. They tell travelers, if you walk there, you will see the path of the river. But it is only a shadow now. Respect can bring it back, but only respect. The river had vanished, but the story, the warning, the memory, lived on. Years had passed since the river vanished from Amalkwe. The elders had grown older. Some had joined their ancestors. Some still walked carefully near the dry riverbed, teaching children about obedience, respect, and the spirit of water. But the younger generation had only known hardship. They grew up fetching water from government tanks, digging hand-dug wells that barely lasted the dry season, collecting rainwater in rusty barrels, traveling long distances to neighboring villages to carry life in buckets. Amalkwe had adapted. The festivals continued. The masquerades danced. Children laughed. But the magic that once flowed from the river had gone. Some villagers remembered the old laws. Some tried to follow them. Some laughed and ignored them. A small church still stood near the old riverbank. Women attended faithfully, singing, clapping, praying. But a few dared to swim in the forbidden sections. Some hunted the remaining fish. And slowly, the sacred memory weakened further. One day, a group of children playing in the forest stumbled upon a strange sign. Smooth stones, slightly raised above the earth. A bend in the trees forming a natural channel. Moss and small plants growing in a pattern that suggested water had flowed there long ago. They ran to the elders. The elders' eyes widened. The river once flowed here, one whispered. It is gone now, but it left a sign. The children stared at the stones and listened. Some swore the cold air felt trickling, like whispers from the past. That night, the elders gathered under the moonlight. Our people forgot the laws, one said softly. We broke the covenant. The village fell silent. No one argued. No one laughed. Amalkwe had learned the hardest lesson. Blessings are not eternal when respect is lost. Yet, as the wind rustled through the trees near the forest, some villagers claimed they heard a faint sound. Like water moving in the distance. Soft, gentle, almost a sigh. Some called it imagination. Some called it hope. Even in modern times, Amalkwe survives. They dig holes. They rely on rainwater. They wait for government supplies. But no stream or river nourishes the land as it once did. Still, the elders point to the forest and tell visitors, walk carefully there. Respect the past. If you listen closely, you may hear the river, waiting to return. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, the youngest children swear, I held water flowing. I think the spirit is still here. Amakwe had lost its river, but it had not lost its story. A story of kindness, obedience, and the sacred covenant. A story to warn generations. Respect the gifts you are given, or they will disappear. And so the legend continues, whispered softly beneath the moonlight. From one generation to the next, the river of Amalkwe vanished, but its memory lives on. Would you obey the river's rules if it returned? Comment below, I would, or I wouldn't, and subscribe to hear more African legends that test faith and courage.